Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Target Jobs webinar on workshops, a complete how-to guide. My name is Lacey, I'm an editor at Target Jobs, and today I'm also joined by three other editors at Target Jobs, so it's a little bit of a special edition webinar for you this afternoon. Before I introduce you to the panelists, I will run you through how this webinar will go. So it will be about 45 minutes of talking points, all topics around CV writing, how to lay out your CV, and other important points. And then we'll leave about 10, 15 minutes at the end to go through any questions that you have. So you will see a questions tab in the panel. And if you want to put any of your questions that you have the whole way through the webinar, you can throw them in there at any point. And at the end of the webinar, we will go through your questions and read them out to our panelists who will give their insights for you. If you do see any questions that you would like answered yourself, just give it a thumbs up and it will boost it to the top, so it'll upvote, and then we can see kind of the most popular questions and make sure those get seen to first. So yeah, I will now introduce you to our panelists and then we'll get on with the talking points. So if I start with Rachel.
Hi there, yeah, my name is Rachel. I've worked for GTI, which is the parent company of Target Jobs, for 7 or 8 years now, working across a variety of sectors like engineering, science, IT. So talking to a lot of recruiters in those sectors over the years, and then also as well recruiting trainee editors, work experience students into the team. So I've got that perspective on it as well, looking at their applications. So hopefully it can help a little bit today.
Cool, thank you. And Alan, if you could go next.
So I'm Alan. I've been an editor at Target Jobs now for coming up to a year and a half. I predominantly work on the Target Jobs website across various sectors, and I've also worked on our Target Jobs law print publication. Prior to joining Target Jobs, I worked in other content writing roles, and I also did teaching English as a foreign language. And yeah, looking forward to chatting, and hopefully I can share some useful insights.
Great, thanks, Alan. And last but not least, Abby.
Hello, I am the head of the content team at Target Jobs. So we create all of the CV advice and the other application advice that you see on Target Jobs. I have been at GTI for almost 20 years. And throughout that time, I have recruited lots of people, seen lots of CVs, fed back to lots of our interns and trainees. And I just love talking about CVs.
Thank you, great, Abby. So we'll start off with our first talking point, which is kind of covering the basics. So that is what information needs to be included on the CV, and if one of you could kind of cover kind of how many pages should be included as well, that would be helpful. So I'll start with Abby with this one, seeing as you love talking about CV so much.
I do. So most people, when they think about CVs, like there to be hard and fast rules. The truth is there aren't many. For the UK, the main information that you need to include on a CV are your contact details, your education background, so your, for example, details of your degree, and any work experience you have. On top of that, you can include anything else that shows you to be a good candidate and have the skills and strengths that would make you a good hire for the role. So that could be voluntary experience, it could be involvement in extracurricular activities. You can add anything that will show off your skills, but the main things to make sure are on there are your contact details, work experience, and education details. In terms of the length of your CV, in the UK, it should be no more than 2 full pages. It can be 1 full page. The only pointer that I would give is try not to give like 1.5 or 1 and a bit, because that tends to look like you haven't got quite enough information to fill 2 pages.
Thank you. Yeah, pretty solid answer there. I think everything covered. But did Rachel and Alan have anything else to kind of add to that in terms of what information should be included? Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can't disagree with any of that. Spot on, Abby. I guess I can, if it's helpful, we can go into a little bit more detail on some of the sections. So, for example, contact details. When we say that, we're talking name, address, email address, phone number, maybe like your LinkedIn URL or something else relevant, like your GitHub portfolio if you're in the tech kind of area, personal blog, if you're if it's active and it's relevant to your application, I would add there. Consider if it's something you would want recruiters to click on.
Yeah.
And then I guess the same for education. We're talking, we're not saying you have to list everything in terms of every GCSE subject you've ever done, every A level. You can condense it down and just say, 10 GCSEs, A star to C, or whatever that might be, any relevant subjects. Same for A levels. And then again, your degree, it can be as simple as the classification and any relevant modules that you think are the most important for the recruiter to know about, or the dissertation topic. It doesn't have to be everything.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, actually, because it can be really overwhelming when you come to putting in all the specifics. So just to know that you can just say it like that and not go into so many fine details is helpful. So yeah, thank you. Alan, did you have anything you wanted to throw in as well?
I think Rachel and Abby gave all the core advice there, but yeah, in terms of sort of just keeping things clear and concise, to make sure that you really stick to either a full page or 2 full pages, and avoid sort of a layout that might potentially not make your CV look as strong as it possibly could.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So I suppose once you've got all your base information in the CV, your next kind of challenge is how to organize and lay out the CV. So what would be your advice to students when they come to writing it, how to lay out all the information? I'll start with you, Alan, for this one.
Yeah, so in terms of layout, if you're applying for a graduate position, then I think the most important thing to highlight first, after your contact details, is going to be your education history. Following that, it's all about really getting the most relevant information first to your in terms of your application. So following your education history, you would then want to put your work experience. And then following this, really, as Abby said before, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules in terms of the layout. It's about deciding what information is most important to the specific employer that you're applying to and putting it in that order. So, if you've got maybe some academic achievements that you'd like to highlight, or some extracurricular activities you'd like to highlight, your research into the employer and the skills and experience they're looking for will help you decide in which order you place these 2 things, for example.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point, actually, because I don't think you'd always consider the employer or the sector of work when you're coming to a CV. You might think there's a kind of standard layout. But Rachel, would you say, like Alan said, it's kind of specific to the employer and the area of work you're in, or is there kind of a standard way that you should always lay out a CV?
Yeah, I think one thing we haven't touched on yet, which is very important, is that your CV should be tailored to the employer you're applying to. So it's not just a case of sitting down, making one CV and sending that off to every employer. That's not the most effective route to take, because you're not going to be taking the job description in mind, looking at what the core requirements of the role and making sure your CV fits that. So it's good to have a master CV that's got everything on for you to pick and choose from. So, keep that updated with everything you do. But then when it comes to applying for a job, you can then take that master CV, look at it, move it around, add things in, and make sure it's the best CV for the specific job you're applying for, in terms of it meets the requirements of the job description. You're showing that you've got the skills, experience required. You're presenting yourself as the best candidate. That's ultimately what you want your CV to do. So that's the case of making sure that the most important things are prominent on the CV towards the top. And that could be something as simple as your work experience section, considering how that would work best for you. Do you just want one section entirely on work experience, and that puts everything in there, your part-time jobs, your industry experience? Say, for example, if you're applying to a tech company and you've got some placements in the tech industry, you might want to consider actually having different headings. So, for example, technology work experience, and then a different heading which is part-time work. If you split it up, and that way you can get the technology experience nice and top of your CV. It doesn't come, for example, before your part-time job, which they're going to love to hear about, but you might want to shout about the other things first. One thing I would add to that, though, is avoid the headings relevant work experience and other work experience, because in that case you're not doing justice to the other work experience. You're suggesting it's not relevant to your application. That is not true at all. Part-time jobs give you transferable skills that are very important. It's just you want to shine a light on your tech experience in that particular case.
Yeah, definitely. And
Sorry, Lacey, and just to add on to that, so with your headings, if you're wanting to apply for, say, a media role and you've got a media internship, but then you've worked on your student paper, you could have a heading quite near the top saying kind of media work experience and voluntary activity, and include both together, so it looks like you have a lot of media experience. So you can just play with the layout, see what sells you best.
Yeah, definitely. I think a masterboard is a good idea as well, especially if you're applying to a few jobs and you need to kind of edit it. So yeah, thank you guys. I suppose, so we've covered kind of the basics, information to include and how to lay it out. But I suppose for those who have all the information and they know how to lay it out, some might think they have too much information. So I suppose the next question might be, if I have too much information, how do I kind of rationalize it down? How do I cut it if you've got too much to say? I know you sometimes want to include everything, but sometimes you can't. So Rachel, what would kind of be your top advice for that situation?
Oh, I think it's really going to have to be a case of going back to the job description, reread it, identifying the key thing, what are the 3, 4, 5 top things that you've got to demonstrate here, and then which of your experiences best showcase those things. And it will be a case of just picking for that specific job. It will change depending on the job, but you might have a couple of experiences that are best for one application, and then you might have another job you're applying to. Oh, and I need to include that because that's really relevant. I think Abby might be able to add to this more, but for me, it's going back to the job description, re-identifying your priorities, and then thinking it through. Again, that's the best I can offer, I think.
I think that's a really good advice, Rachel. I agree with that. I would also say you can group together some of your experiences. So, say for example, you've done lots of bar work. You can, and you're thinking, actually, if I summarize all of my achievements and all of my skills, it's going to sound quite repetitive. You can group them together and just have as your work experience heading a variety of bar posts, list the employers and the dates, and then have like one summary that pulls out kind of key skills and key activities and key achievements. So you can look at it, you can condense your CV that way as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, especially when I know I've done it when I've applied to jobs previously where I haven't considered the employer as much as I should have, because I'm just so desperate to get all the information included, wasn't thinking about what's relevant. So I think that's kind of a key advice point there. Alan, did you have anything to add?
No, just to build really on what you guys have already been saying. You don't want to take away attention from the key experiences and information that you do have. So yeah, just go back, revisit the job description, revisit the research that you've done into the role in the industry, and make sure that you're clear on what the key skills that the employer is looking for are, and yeah, make sure that your information that you include addresses those.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It's good. Sorry, just wanted to interrupt. It's good to see that there's so many of you interacting in the chat tab. But if you could just make sure you put your questions in the questions tab, just so we've got it all kind of in one place to go through at the end, just to mention. But it's good to see so many people. So we've mentioned work experience in the previous question. So I suppose another important point you'd come across when writing your CV is non-work experience information to include, and hobbies that you might not feel irrelevant, but you want to put on your CV. So what would be kind of your key advice for students who don't feel they have relevant work experience or non-work experience when writing a CV? Alan, if I come to you first.
So I think here you've really got to focus on the skills again that the employer is looking for. Whether or not the experience that you've included on your CV is from an actual job, if you like, or an extracurricular or whatever it's from. It's about identifying the transferable skills that you've gained from those experiences and highlighting them in your CV, so the employer can see that, okay, perhaps this person hasn't worked a part-time job or done a formal internship or whatever, but I can see here that they've either developed some of the skills or at least shown potential to be able to learn the skills that I need them to do in my role. So yeah, I think focus on what it is you've learned from those experiences and make sure you highlight those in your CV.
Just to jump in there, because there's a few questions about this in the chat as well. The whole point of a CV, the whole purpose of it, is to say to the employer in 1 or 2 pages, I would be a great asset for your organization. I am right for the role and I want the role. So to do that, you can pick out skills and achievements from any area of your life. So it could be from your degree, it could be from any extracurricular activity, it could be from a gap year, from your part-time jobs. Quite often people leave off what they think of as quite menial jobs, such as, I don't think they're menial, but I've had students come to me and say, I work in a care home, should I put it on my CV? And I'm like, absolutely, because from that, there are so many skills, responsibility, empathy, caring for others. So you bring in any skill or any achievement and write it up, focusing on your achievements. So in a part-time job, and actually, Alan, you've got much more bar experience than me because I've got none. But actually, it's quite busy. You serve a lot of customers very quickly. You have to be quite assertive, I'd imagine. All of which are brilliant skills for the workplace. So in terms of bringing together, or not thinking you've got any experience or skills, just list them out. List out everything you've done. And then say, you know what, actually, I had to plan my gap year. I had to work out how to fund it. That gave me budgeting experience and analysis skills because I had to compare flight deals. Start with that, I would say.
Definitely.
Yeah, sorry, Lacey. No, I think what you were saying there, Abby, with the bar work example was really important because it can be easy to focus on the technical skills that the employer is looking for, and you might actually do yourself a discredit by not including an experience, because that might show evidence of some of the human skills that the employer might be looking for. So yeah, make sure to really consider all of your experiences and just take a step back and think, right, what have I gained from this? Because you don't want to do yourself a disfavor and cut out something that would actually benefit you.
Yeah, I think it's really useful to include human skills as well as the kind of hard skills that you assume you have to put on a CV. So really good examples as well for anyone. And, if you're at university and you're part of a society or you've done a project that even if you didn't enjoy, you've gained skills from it. So yeah. Rachel, did you have anything you kind of wanted to add to that point?
No, I don't think so. I think Abigail and Alan have taken the words out of my mouth.
Yeah, with some good examples as well. Cool. So Abby, if I start with you for this one, because it is kind of a more kind of straightforward question. Should you include a personal statement or photo on your CV? I'm sure is a common question.
Oh, well, actually, it's not that straightforward. I mean, in terms of photograph in the UK, no, that is not a requirement, and it probably helps against any kind of fear of unconscious bias creeping into the process if you don't. But having said that, many LinkedIn profiles do include photos, so maybe it's less important. Personal statements. This is subjective, and I think this is the key thing. Everybody looking at your CV will have a different opinion on what should be there and what should not be there. Personal statements can be really useful to kind of introduce you as a candidate and kind of summarize what your career ambition is or key skills. I find, especially if you are applying with a covering letter as well, that many graduates putting on a personal statement don't add anything useful to their CV. It is amazing how many times I see creative English literature graduate looking for a job in publishing. And because many students kind of say the same thing, and so they don't stand out. And I know you're looking for a job in publishing because you've applied to me, and I'm guessing you're creative because you've applied to me. So I often say, don't put on this personal statement unless you can add something really unique and point to skills that make you stand out. But if you talk to other recruiters, they might have a different opinion.
Yeah, and is it common for an employer to ask for a personal statement? Is it something that they might put on an application to say include personal statement?
Not really, because if they want that kind of introductory information about why you would be a good hire, they usually ask for a a covering letter, which that's the job of a covering letter, is to introduce you and make an argument as to why you are a good candidate. Or they might ask you to fill out an application question that does the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's really up to you again, with the CV, it's up to you as to what looks best for you. The only thing I would say is that if you are applying for a role, perhaps with a recruitment agency, or you are putting a CV on a jobs board, and there is not an opportunity to write a covering letter, you might want to put a personal statement on your CV.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel and Alan, did you have any other advice points around personal statements and a photo, which is also in part of the question?
Yeah, I'd just echo Abby, like to summarise, I think if you don't have the opportunity to provide a cover letter, a personal statement, you may choose to go down that route just to give you a quick summary, but you've just got to make sure it's saying something. It's not empty words. Like, nobody's going to admit that they're not hardworking. You're not going to say, "Oh, I'm a lazy student." You're not going to say that. Everyone says they're hardworking. So I would rather see something concrete. For example, picture it as a summary of your CV almost. So, English Lit graduate with experience in XYZ, looking for first role in, like that. I would find that more helpful than kind of just listing skills.
Yeah, I think summary of your CV is a helpful starting point, because it can feel really overwhelming when you hear personal statement and think there's so many things you have to list. So I think that's a good way of looking at it.
But I think if you find yourself sat there tying yourself up in knots, like putting it in for the sake of it, like you're not sure what to say, that's probably a sign to not include it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're applying for an engineering role and you've been lucky enough to gain some experience in different types of engineering industries or different types of employers within an industry, you might want to add that to a personal statement and say, keen mechanical engineering final student who's completed experience in manufacturing and in construction, and now looking to specialize in X.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, guys. Pretty solid answers there and examples. So thank you. Alan, is there anything else you'd like to throw in there? Has it all kind of been covered, do you think?
I think the main things have been covered, but I guess just the final thing that I would add is that, with any section on your CV, you want to be adding value to your application, if you like. And so if that's the first thing that the employer is going to see, the last thing you want to do is put them off with some sort of generic statement that every other application is going to have. So unless you feel that the personal statement has something of real value to add that you aren't explaining anywhere else in your CV, then yeah, it's a good idea. But otherwise, it's best, I think, in my opinion, it's best just to get to the recruiter to the key information of your application as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. And so, yeah, the next talking point we've got is around CV gaps, which is something that you may not always think of if you haven't had a gap in your employment. But for those who may have been in that situation where they've got a CV gap that they potentially can't explain or don't know how to approach, what would your kind of top advice be around that, Alan? Do you have any kind of top advice?
Sorry, Lacey, I think my connection dropped for a second then. Would you mind repeating the question?
That's all right. Yeah, it's just around CV gaps. So for any students who have any gaps in their CV, for example, a period of time where they were out of employment or in a situation they couldn't quite explain or don't know how to, what would be your kind of advice for CV gaps and approaching them?
Yeah, so I think you should always strive to explain a gap. And the first thing I would say in this situation is just to think about what you've been doing over this period, because you might have been doing an activity that potentially gave you skills or gave you knowledge or an experience that is transferable to the job that you're applying for. And so if you haven't got a sort of explanation such as a medical condition or something that, really was sort of out of your control, I would say, yeah, focus on the activities that you have been doing that gave you skills, experience and knowledge that can be transferred to the job. So, have you been at home? I don't know. Let's say you've been applying for jobs for a while and had no luck. Have you just been applying for jobs, or have you also been perhaps taking an online course for the last few months? What have you learned from that? Or have you perhaps been, I don't know, volunteering, maybe even if it's just once a week? What have you been doing to actually fill that time that you can use as an explanation for that gap? And yeah, just do your best to address it. And I think be honest with the employer.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good approach if you, like you said, if you can include that. But for Rachel and Abby, for those who feel like maybe they haven't got something tangible they can say that they did in that period where they weren't working, what kind of advice would you give for CV gaps?
Well, I think for one thing, I'd say, recruiters are well aware that you're a student at the start of your career. That's what the first thing I would say to you on this. You are a student at the start of your career. You're not a superhero. You can't do everything at once. You're also studying for a degree, I might add. So they're not expecting you to be able to fill every moment with something CV worthy. You also need to have a life and chill time. So, that's okay. I wouldn't stress about minor breaks like that. Not everyone has a part-time job while they're at uni. Not everyone has a job in the summer to put on. Like Alan says, there may be other things that you can talk about on your CV. You might have also just wanted to go on holiday in the summer, and that's okay. You are allowed to do that. So I think sometimes you've got to just take a step back and think, am I stressing about this gap for no reason? Like, is this just a normal gap? Just life. But, maybe if you've had a gap year between A levels, college and university, maybe, you want to make sure on your CV you found a way to kind of talk about what you did during that gap year. And equally, Alan kind of touched on, if you're at, maybe you graduated a little while ago and you've been looking for jobs, recruiters are aware that that's a thing. But yes, there may be things that you've done in that time that you think shouldn't go on your CV, but actually, if they're helping you to demonstrate skills, motivation, who you are as a person, then they can go on the CV.
Yeah, so you can give yourself a break while also trying to find relevant experiences. You can go easy on yourself as well, like Rachel said. Abby, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with Rachel and Alan. Again, ask yourself if it really is a gap. I mean, when I look at TVs, I'm not, I'm expecting it to take, up to a year for people to find their first graduate role. I'm not, thinking like what happened. And, we know that there are reasons such as, people taking an extra year for their degree because they chose the wrong course. That's sort of normal. That's okay. I think if you can show throughout your CV that you're interested in things and you're constantly learning or you're pursuing a further interest, that's enough, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really useful as well to, like you said, define what a gap is, because even myself, I'm not actually too sure, what you would define as a gap in your CV. So that's really useful. Thank you.
But sorry, Lisa, I would just say, if you're in doubt, go to a careers advisor at a university, because they will be able to give you very specific advice on your situation. And most career services are open to their graduates as well as their current students.
Yeah, thank you. It's always an answer somewhere. So getting back to kind of, I suppose, how a CV physically looks. It's something that you might not even think about if you're just so focused on getting the information in there, but it is important to think about the design of it. So the typeface, font colors and file types. So Rachel, what would be your first advice for how it physically looks in typeface and font and all of that?
Oh, interesting. So for me, the priority is that it just looks tidy, professional, not overwhelming, nothing that you got to think a human is reading this. So not does it look presentable? Does it look tidy? Not too over. Is it easy to scan? Have you broken up the information nicely with headings, bullet points? I'm personally, from a recruiting perspective, I'm not worried about what typeface you've used, as long as it maybe don't use a really fancy one that's really hard to read. But besides that, I'm not judging you based on your font, things like that, the colours, as long as you've got to bear in mind some people do print off CVs still to review. So maybe just consider that when you're choosing colours. Don't choose something that maybe won't show up if printed. But some people have different opinions, and if you've got a flair for design and you can make your CV look great, go for it. But for me, your experience talks more.
Yeah, Abby, would you say that it's more important for it to be neat and professional than it is to have specific fonts and typefaces and those kind of things?
Absolutely, as long as they're consistent, the typefaces and the font. So if that's part of neat and tidy, whether you've used the same headings in the same sort of way, like the same size for different things, because that shows an attention to detail. Again, you might, as Rachel says, you might, if you're going for a design role, you might put a little bit more attention on that than others. And I would say that in most cases, you can submit a PDF as a CV, unless the employer says they only want a Word document or Google Doc. So you can play with the design of your CV a little bit. Actually, in the CV templates that we have on Target Jobs that I put a link to in the chat, we actually just used the Microsoft Word one and played with that one because we thought it was nice and accessible.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's good that you mentioned design as well, because our next talking point is about creative CVs. So are there, I mean, myself, it's interesting to know because I'm not too sure. Are there differences with how creative CV should look, or how an employer would expect them to look, or is it just the same kind of premise? It needs to be professional and neat. What would your thoughts be on that, Alan? If I start with you for this one.
Yeah, so I think first, always follow the instructions in the application. The employer might give you the information that you're looking for there in terms of how your application should look and the format that you need to submit it in, your CV, I should say. But in terms of getting creative, I personally think that less is more when it comes to this thing. You don't want to take away the emphasis from your from the information contained in your CV. That's what's really selling you as best for the role. Of course, if you are going for a creative role, making your CV stand out with a little bit of color or a creative font is going to do that. But the key is to sort of look at your CV and also have someone else check it and ask them and yourself, am I distracting you from the key information with the design or the amount of color, for example? So yeah, find that balance between not going too far with the colors you include, with the type of font that you choose, so as not to distract from the key information contained in it.
Yeah, Abby, would you agree with that, or is there kind of a bigger difference with creative CVs and how they're presented?
I do agree. I would say by creative CVs, what we mean are CVs that you might do for a particular industry to show you're different. So the kind of classic example would be designing your CV as a wine label and sending it to an advertising agency who happen to be representing vineyards. So it's that kind of quirky CV. People have quite strong opinions on these. For me personally, the key thing that I look for when I look at a CV, and bear in mind that you've got a pile of CVs, or you've got a whole load on the application system, they're just piling up. You only spend 30 seconds on a quick sift before you decide whether you're going to look at it in more detail. So I want to know the basics really quickly. So, do you have the essential skills and qualifications that I'm looking for? Are you, do you have the strengths and skills really quickly? And then if I think yes, you do, then I will look at your CV in more detail. So for me, the emphasis is on making sure that information is clear and easily found.
Yeah, I think that's important advice as well, because it's something I didn't even realise whilst I was at university, how quickly employers can sift through CVs. So really it needs to be all the important elements in there, presented as clearly and professionally as possible. So yeah, really good advice. Thank you. That is the end of our talking points. I think we've covered quite a lot there, but luckily we have got quite a few questions. So the most popular one, it is quite a few different elements to it. So I'll read it through it, and then maybe between the three of you can kind of break it down. So it says, I would like to know what is the CV screening procedure and mechanism. Is it solely controlled by machines? What is the preferred document format, Word or PDF? And are there any unique tips to make our CVs both professional and lively, similar to what you've kind of just covered? But yeah, I'll kind of leave that one open to you guys to answer.
Do you want me to start, and then people can?
Yeah.
So if I understand the question, it really does depend on the employer and what systems they use and what screenings they use. So yes, some, especially some large organizations, will have systems that will scan your CV and pull out relevant experience or relevant keywords, relevant skills to decide whether it is worth a human looking at your CV, or whether from your CV they don't think you're quite right for the role. With smaller employers, it will be down to that human eye. So as I said earlier, I spent like 30 seconds doing an initial sift. In terms of screening and deciding whether you're invited to the next stage of the recruitment process, it does depend on the employer, but employers should have some kind of matrix or scoring system. So they will kind of, as objectively as possible, rank you on how good a fit you are for the role. So do you have evidence of this skill or that skill? How much, kind of like how much interest have you shown in the profession? And they will score you according to their own scoring system. And those who get the highest score will be invited through to interview. Is that a good start to that question?
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm not sure if it was going down the AI route with the beginning of the question, so I didn't want to assume, but yeah, I think that's a pretty thorough answer for what they were asking. Rachel, sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, I would say Abby's completely right. Like, if I try and give an example, like, if you're going for an editorial content role, for example, one thing that might be in the matrix for the CV screening is spelling and grammar. So one thing you might be looking at is how many how clean is it, how many spelling and grammar mistakes. That might be one part of the matrix. Another part of the matrix might be, have they articulated why they want to work for our company? And there'll be different ones, and they're looking to see what you tick. So, but it depends. I think another part of the question was, what is the preferred document format, Word or PDF? I would say it doesn't matter. Unless the employer has specified one or the other in the instructions. So again, make sure you've read the instructions. The only time I think maybe a PDF would have an advantage over Word is if you have been quite creative with the design of your CV, maybe introduced columns, etc., and perhaps when you send it, some of that format could get lost in translation in a Word document, get muddled up. A PDF would prevent that from happening. So maybe if your CV is a bit more design heavy, a PDF would work better, but that's not to say you need to. And then I think it was unique tips to make your CV both professional and lively. I think you've just got to be true to yourself and your personality in the CV. And I know that's a hard thing to say, but it is just be yourself. I think one section where the liveliness often comes through for me personally is if you do have a further interest section, or I know if I look at my CV, that's where my personality comes across. So in the further interests, if you've listed them, I like to see that someone's breathed a bit of life into that and given me a bit more, not just said, I like reading. Okay, cool. But what genres? Are you a member of a book club, for example? What have you read recently? What's your favorite book? If you say you like marathons, which marathons have you run? What are your achievements there? I think that breathes a bit of life and personality into a CV.
Yeah,
for me.
I think that's useful actually, because even when I've written CVs before, I thought, well, am I oversharing by putting this information in there? Maybe it should be just more of a general point. But like you said, it kind of humanizes you a bit more and it shows your personality. So I think that's really important. Alan, did you have anything from any of those points that you wanted to add to?
Yeah, I was just going to add that in terms of making your CV lively, if you've got an achievement section in there, then perhaps you've got an academic achievement. Instead of just stating what the achievement was, maybe you received an award for a grade that you achieved in a certain subject. Maybe give information about what it was that you did that actually got you that award. What was the project? Perhaps a little detail on what it entailed. Just to shed light on why you found that interesting, and to show it as more than just an award, but also what's the knowledge that you've taken away from it.
Yeah, definitely. You're allowed to show off your achievements. Okay. The next one I think we've kind of covered a little bit with personal statement and including key skills. I think Rachel's kind of covered that a bit earlier. The next one we've got is, what is the oldest work experience you should consider adding to your CV? Is there such thing as outdated work experience? Which I think is quite a good one. I know we've said about, everything is transferable, but is there a kind of date that you should be considering when talking about work experience?
Should I go and then you guys jump in?
Whoever wants to.
Fire away, Abby.
Okay, so some recruiters might state on there, we only want to see experiences from your past 5 years, for example, but that's quite rare. I would say include anything from any time in your life if it shows you've got the skills and qualities and determination. You might not want to go back to, I was a prefect at secondary school. Hopefully you've got something that shows those skills a little bit more recent, but if it demonstrates your skills, include it.
Definitely. Does anybody else have any points on that one?
Yeah, I'd agree. The only thing I'd say is you might not want that to be the experience you lead with. It might not be on the first page of your CV or at the top of your CV. It might be a bit later down, and especially if it's experience relating to the industry and it's to demonstrate enthusiasm for the industry. I think an employer would probably like to see enthusiasm for the industry more recently than 5 years. That not be the only thing, but I wouldn't not include it. I just probably wouldn't put it right at the top as saying this is the best thing I've got.
Yeah, definitely. There's a question actually here that would tie into that is, are extracurricular activities important for a graduate CV? I know we have kind of gone over that, but just for kind of concrete answer on that, is it something that should be included if you've done extracurricular activities? Yes, basically.
Yeah, if it demonstrates interest, skills, definitely. Where in your CV you place it, I think is more the question, as long as it's helping to demonstrate that you've got the skills that the employer is looking for.
Yeah, I guess everything, like we said, comes down to tailoring to what's important, what's relevant to the employer, as well as putting in all the important information. So yeah, there's another one that's kind of back to, I suppose, physically how the CV will look. Someone who wants to know what the maximum number of bullet points relevant to add to a piece of evidence under every work experience, I think is quite an interesting one, because you might not all think of that. So yeah, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule there. Like I can't turn around and say, 3 bullet points for everyone. What I would say is just consider how it looks on the page. So, I always say keep each bullet point to roughly 2 lines each, rather than one bullet point that's 4 lines, 5 lines. That starts to look quite heavy. So actually it's better to have a few bullet points, but 2 lines per one. And yeah, okay, you probably don't want one section of bullet points to take up half a page, for example. But that's just going to have to be a judgment call on does it look too overwhelming on the page? Does it look concise? There's no hard and fast. You're only allowed 2-3 bullet points per experience, I would say. Abby might disagree. If she does, I'm sure she'll say.
No, I totally agree. I would say it depends totally on how much you've got to say about that experience, and how relevant it is to the role. So as Rachel says, you probably don't want 6 or 8, 10, 12 bullet points, but you should capture the most important things in your bullet points. And if that takes 5 bullet points, then fantastic. If it takes 3 bullet points, that's also fine.
Yeah, do a bit of sense checking as well to see kind of what's appropriate. Abby, this would be quite a good one for you actually, about engineering. So it's someone that said, I'd like to ask the panel specifically on engineering CVs and what employers are looking for on engineering CVs, what they could do to stand out. I know it's kind of similar rules for all types of CVs, but is there any specific engineering advice when it comes to CVs?
Well, I might pass over to Rachel for this one, actually.
Okay, I mean, I have just replied to that message because I've directed you to an article on Target Jobs, which is engineering CVs and covering letters, and we do have a template CV specifically for engineering. I would say engineering recruiters aren't worlds away from other recruiters, but they are looking for some engineering. They might be looking at your engineering knowledge or engineering skills, but engineering recruiters, just as much as recruiters in other industries, still love to hear about your soft skills, your extracurriculars, the other things you've done. It doesn't need to be all engineering experience on there. But I think that article I've sent will help more with that.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, good to have a link directly to go and check that out. So thank you. This is quite an interesting one actually. Is it necessary to state why you are applying for a job on your CV, given that it comes up in interviews? I know we've already covered that, it should be tailored to the employer and how much you know about them and the skills that are appropriate for that employer. But do you actually have to say why you're applying for the job on the CV? Anyone who wants to take that on?
depends on whether you have the opportunity to write a covering letter. So the purpose of a covering letter is to create an argument as to why you are a good hire. So it should cover what vacancy you are applying for, why you would be a good fit for that role. So you pick out skills, experiences, achievements from your CV that prove that, say, why you would be a good candidate, and crucially includes a paragraph on why you specifically want that role with that company. And if you don't have the chance to write that either in an application form question or in a covering letter, then yes, I would include it in your kind of personal statement at the top of your CV.
Yeah, that's helpful. I didn't actually completely know that, so thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts on that one, or that's kind of covered?
I think that covers that one.
Cool. We've got a question here about references, which again is an important part of the CV. So while writing a CV, is it better to include references right from the start, or is it better to provide them once asked? So yeah, that's quite another important point. So what's everyone's thoughts on that?
I would say, again, first, check the instructions on the job description or the application form. If they're asking for references, in your CV, then of course you're going to want to put them in there. From my personal experience, I've always included a references upon request, just a simple sentence. This way I save space on my CV, but I let the employer know that if they do want to speak with anyone, well, I've got a reference ready for when they want to speak with them. But otherwise, yeah, I think it comes down to the instructions in the application.
Yeah. Abby, did you have any other advice around?
No, I think that's perfect. I think if you're looking to fill 2 pages and you've got a little bit of space, it might be a good, you can add references. But if you are adding references, please ask and tell your referees before putting their details on your CV.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. We've also got a question around LinkedIn as well, which I'm sure there are a few people that have similar questions. It says, I'm an undergraduate student who has come across and is interested in an intern opportunity on LinkedIn, and just wanted to ask, even though after my resume, should I upload my CV? I mean, I don't know if that's individual to the employer, but what would your thoughts be on going through LinkedIn?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question, Lacey.
So they've come across, they're interested in an intern opportunity on LinkedIn, and even though it asks for their resume, should they upload their CV anyway? I'm not sure if that's what they mean.
Well, a resume is a CV. So
yeah.
I think you can definitely apply for vacancies on LinkedIn. From what I understand, some employers will use your LinkedIn profile. So your LinkedIn profile should definitely match your CV, or they might ask you to upload a CV separately. I think it depends on the employer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that might be dependent on the employer and what they're asking, but yeah, good to have a kind of a chat anyway. Another interesting point that I hadn't considered before, is it possible to write a good CV without my degree? Without a degree, I understand the number of skills that are being written and not as many without a degree, but is it possible to acquire a good job? I'm sure the answers will be yes, and it's the same, but what are your kind of advice points for that person?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one, considering that. So yeah, I didn't go to university. I decided to jump straight into work, and I've ended up in what I guess would be considered like a job that would usually be for graduates. Sometimes you might decide that you want to get a bit creative with your CV in order to sort of demonstrate your skills and experience outside of having a degree. And in my case, I laid my CV out with a skill section. And that way I highlighted the skills that I felt were in a clear section on my CV that I felt were relevant to the role when I was applying. And I've had success in my applications by doing this. So yeah, I wouldn't worry so much about not having a degree, as long as you've got the skills to show that as long as you've got evidence of the skills that the employer is looking for. of course, if a degree is a strict requirement for the role, then yes, you would be at a disadvantage. But yeah, it's all about demonstrating the experience and the skills that the employer is looking for, no matter where those come from. I hope that has helped answer.
Yep, your CV is about you and your strengths. So you don't have to have hit certain experiences. You are just bringing together everything that makes the recruiter think you are right for this role. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a degree or not, as long as you can show your other experiences.
Yeah, definitely. Like we've said the whole way through, there's always something that you can that's transferable and that you can apply to your CV. So yeah, it's whether you've got a degree or you haven't, there's always something. I mean, I'm sure if you've gone straight from school and you've gone straight into work or an apprenticeship, there's always so much you can add to a CV, kind of irrespective of the route you took. So yeah, good to answer it anyway. I'm just having a look for something we maybe haven't covered as much. We've got someone who's looking forward to working in the healthcare industry. They've got 2 years of work experience in quality assurance management, but their CV is not getting through the selection process. So I think they're looking for some general advice on how to boost their CV, which I think is quite a good question across the board. How do people boost their CV if they feel like they're not getting through?
This is a really difficult one, and my first piece of advice would be to go to a careers advisor and have an appointment with. It's going to be really hard for me to give it pointers without looking at the CV, if I'm honest, and kind of running. What you would want is somebody to sit down with you and run through your CV with you and have a look. So I would say the best thing you could do is make an appointment with your career service and do that, if possible. Yeah,
best place for answers. Would you say the same thing, Abby?
Absolutely. You might find that a recruitment agency will also review your CV with you, but your careers service should be the first port of call.
Cool, thank you. Oh, let me see what else we've got. Yeah, quite a few about physically how it looks. Someone says, if I don't have a LinkedIn or active other platforms, mainly due to data privacy and its usage, some recruiters demand your LinkedIn applying through LinkedIn, for example. Is it important to have a good CV as well as having an active social media presence in modern times? Quite an interesting question.
100%, you still need your CV. Not all employers are just going to accept a LinkedIn profile. A lot of employers are going to request you send your CV to them. You can't just send them a link, so you're going to need both still. Yes.
Yeah. And the whole difference with a CV is that you can tailor it to the role, and you can make more of your achievements that are relevant to that role, whereas your LinkedIn is naturally going to be more general and more generic.
Yeah, and I suppose LinkedIn can always act as a kind of bonus thing for employers to go and look at, as opposed to just that and no CV. So yeah, as these guys said, definitely a CV.
But you do need to keep both of them updated. You can't have one that shows more experience than the other.
Yeah, also important advice. Just seeing what hasn't kind of already been covered. I did see, I think it was in the chat. I think it was in the chat tab, but I know this is a kind of workshop on CVs, but a few people wanted to know about covering letters and the importance of covering letters, whether they need to be in there, whether you only do it if you're asked to do it. What would your advice points be around covering letters when applying?
Shall I go and then everybody can jump in?
Yeah.
I love a covering letter. So the old advice used to be never send a CV without a covering letter. And certainly if you are applying by email, then yes, you should always include a covering letter. If you are applying via an application form or via LinkedIn, they may say that they don't need one and they just want to see your CV with a personal statement. Certainly for editorial jobs, I do like to see a CV, because a covering letter with your CV, because I like to be able to see how you write and how you can pick out the most relevant information from your CV and make it into a nicely written argument for me. I've forgotten the rest of the question, Lacey. Sorry.
No, it was just just a few people saying you're going to cover CVs. You know, should you include one even if it's not asked of you? Like, is it something that we should practice just doing anyway, or only if your employer's asking for one?
I would say if you are applying via email, always include a covering letter. If you are going through an application form, see what they say and follow instructions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I'm just going through the chat tab to see if there's anything more, because I know that a few went over to there.
I'm just going to add, if that's okay, I've seen a couple of people asking if they're going to get a recording. Yes, you will get a recording sent to you by email, and also this will go up on our YouTube channel, on Target Jobs YouTube channel. And then also I saw someone asked a question, which I'm going to answer. They said, are there going to be any webinars on covering letters and building connections on LinkedIn? I'm not quite sure of that schedule. I would check the events on Target Jobs. But one thing I would say is we have got pathways on Target Jobs, which are like short e-learning courses with videos and activities. And we do have pathways on those two topics, covering letters and building LinkedIn connections. So I would consider going to that section of Target Jobs and completing those pathways if that's something you want to learn more about.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I think there's a few other questions in there. There's also a question about the neurodiversity webinar, which you'll also be able to find on YouTube as well. That's live on there, so you can go and have a look at that. I'll try and end on one more question. Let me just get back to it, which I saw. I saw a question that was essentially about, if your CV is too long, what information should you compromise? Or is it kind of dependent on what's keeping the things that are most appropriate? How would you approach deciding what to take out?
I think that's got to be what we said earlier, which is you're going to have to go back to the individual job, the job description, and review your experiences against those requirements to see which are best. Like Abby said earlier, which was a really good point, you know, if you've got a lot of part-time work that covers the same kind of territory, you could look at condensing that down into an overall, you know, or I know when I first started applying, I kept everything on, and then eventually I was like, oh, I should probably just pick 2 of these part-time jobs, not all of them, because they're all showing similar skills. So that might be the route you go down, but I can't guarantee it, because it depends on what job you're applying to and what skills are most important. You know, if you're applying to a job in hospitality, you might not want to get rid of those part-time jobs. It's going to depend. It's just going back to the job description and thinking it through. And, you know, if you're really struggling to do that on your own, think about whether there's somebody you could go to get a second opinion on, whether that's a trusted family member, trusted friend, careers advisor. You know, you can get opinions if you do need that.
Yeah, definitely. Would you all say then that kind of the key takeaway from CV writing is considering the employer, considering the relevant information, and tailoring? What would you kind of say are the kind of, to close off, the kind of most important points to remember when CV writing?
It is tailoring. It is tailoring.
Yeah.
I think Abby said something really nice earlier about essentially a CV is your chance to show that employer in 2 pages why they should want to hire you, why you're a, you know, potentially great employee for them, and keep that in the back of your mind when you're writing the CV.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so many other elements that can overwhelm you when it comes to writing a CV. So if you just remember that, you should be kind of on your way. So yeah, thank you. I think we'll end it there. But thank you to all of you guys, the panelists, for joining. Thank you everyone for watching and joining today. And thank you for all your questions and comments in the tabs, because you kind of kept us with lots of things to talk about. In terms of kind of upcoming webinars, if you head over to our events page on Target Jobs, I'm not sure if there's anything been put in the chat tab, there might be, but if not, yeah, if you go to the events page of Target Jobs, you'll see kind of upcoming webinars, and yeah, you can sign up to them on there. But yeah, as I said, thank you everyone for joining. Hope it's been useful, has been for me, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.